Fashion underwent quite the shakeup back in the 70s. The decade was still under the influence of the 60s, with hippie fashion still quite popular. However, even with how iconic most of these hippie trends were, I still remember a lot of them being total head-scratchers. Tie-dye. Starting off our list is tie-dye, the LSD of fabric patterns. You know, it's quite easy to forget just how rampant these guys were, mostly because they've made comebacks after comebacks a couple of times since the 70s. But I can't forget just how chaotic, loud, and straight up impossible to ignore they were back in the 70s. In fact, my uncle called them the visual equivalent of a Grateful Dead jam session. Well, you might have no problem with tie-dyes right now. Why would you? But then, the 70s dismissed it as nothing but a messy DIY project gone horribly wrong. Did you wash that with a bag of Skittles? They asked. Regardless of all that, hippies did what they do best: embrace the nauseating chaos, turning themselves into literal walking kaleidoscopes. The secret though? Tie-dye was pretty fun. It just didn't take itself seriously. So, why should the people wearing it? Well, it didn't take long before even major brands began taking tie-dye seriously, going as far as selling pre-dyed versions. You had to style these vibrant, bold colors with loose-fitting garments, like maxi dresses or bell-bottom jeans. Essentially, all you had to do was embrace the psychedelic aesthetic. Anywho, you can't talk about those loose-fitting garments without talking about our next fashion trend: maxi dresses. Next up, maxi dresses, or as my mom called them, nightgowns that went outside. Following the miniskirt rave of the 60s, the maxi dress felt like that sequel no one asked for. We're talking flowy, floor-length, and oftentimes paired with a floppy hat. It was pretty much a nightgown's glamorous cousin. As usual, the 70s always resented what they didn't understand, and maxi dresses didn't just make much sense to anyone. Skeptics called it a joke, asking questions like, "Are you in your PJs or a cult?" However, hippies just didn't care. They were down for the ethereal, witchy vibes. As a bonus, maxis were quite comfortable. You didn't have to worry about awkward bends or wind gusts. In no time, others began to see the appeal. Yeah, they weren't as glamorous as all the other fashion trends from the time, but maxi dresses just worked, especially when you styled them well. When designers like Halston added sequins and slits, the maxi went from despised hippie fashion to literal red carpet gold. A couple decades later, it's still the go-to for looking great without even trying. A night out, casual afternoon, even a date, you name it. Next up, a fashion trend pretty much on the other end of the hippie fashion trend: tube tops. In 8th place, tube tops. Just look at it. Bet it brings back some memories. A simple band of fabric that somehow became a staple in the fashion world. Till today, it remains a mystery to me how ladies back in the 70s pulled tube tops off, but they looked incredible and audacious every single time. You know what? Picture this: a tube top under a lovely satin bomber jacket paired with a ditto jean and a platform shoe just to add the right amount of height to your look. And don't forget to top that all off with a scarf tied just right. In fact, you could also embrace the disco and pair with a flowy kimono. Add a statement belt and accessorize it with chunky jewelry like a chunky necklace and big hoop earrings. You get the idea. And while of course, these all sound just about great now, back then, not so much. Remember what it was like? You wouldn't want to be caught wearing a tube top to school unless you threw a shirt over it. But once that last school bell rung, that shirt came off and it was time to party again. Well, still on tops. Crochet tops. No one wants to be caught dead wearing a sweater that looks like it was made by a very cheery grandma. Well, now anyway, and that brings us to our next hippie fashion trend: crochet tops. Crochet tops were pretty much the peak of hippie craftsmanship. They embodied everything hippie stood for. Handmade, breezy, slightly see-through. Oh, scandalous. And most importantly, crochet tops just said, "I'm one with the earth." While hippies loved them, the 70s called them impractical. And what if it rains, they said. Nevertheless, teens, especially flower children, just adored the bohemian flair. Plus, crochet was quite versatile. Just like all the other fashion trends on here, it didn't take long before the rest of the world caught on. Pair crochet tops with jeans for a simple coffee run, or throw on a maxi skirt for a jam session. In fact, when 70s stars like Sophia Loren, Stevie Nicks, Raquel Welch, Tina Turner, and so many more began rocking crochet pieces on the biggest stage, the world finally understood crochet could be daring. Headbands and floppy hats. Next up is less of an outfit and more of an accessory, just to complete the look. In sixth place, headbands and floppy hats. The 70s had a thing for low-maintenance hair. You know, not having to do too much up there. And absolutely nothing yelled, "I woke up this way," quite like showing up in a headband or floppy hat. I can remember my mom always calling them lazy and wondering why they didn't even bother trying. And she wasn't the only one. The 70s as a whole thought that way, really. Honestly, though, hippies knew the truth, and people got it spot on. These accessories hid bad hair days, while doubling as sun protection when they were out. And they were always out. During yoga sessions, headbands kept flyaways in check. As for floppy hats, they gave everyone instant Stevie Nicks mystique. I remembered when Jane Birkin made bedhead chic and the world followed. Now, they're staples in the fashion world, proof that even laziness can be legendary. Granny glasses. In fifth place is a hippie fashion trend that really stuck with the world. One that definitely doesn't need much of an introduction because of a certain Beatle. Next up, granny glasses. I know you've been waiting for this one. Round, tinted, and at times paired with a pretentious book, granny glasses were John Lennon's signature style, and initially the 70s punchline. "You look like a librarian from Mars." That was everyone's punchline. But as the anti-establishment vibe only grew, so did the appeal of looking kind of intellectual. Nothing said, "I read poetry and hate the establishment," quite like a pair of granny glasses. By the time Elton John began bedazzling his pair, they went from intellectual-ish to quirky cool. And don't get me started on styling them. They go with pretty much anything you could think of from the 70s. Every hipster's must-have. Fringe jackets. Fringe jackets were the ultimate mess with the bull, you get the horns fashion. Inspired by Western wear and Native Americans, these suede jackets were dripped with so many tassels, it got people wondering whether it was a jacket or a mop. As you expect, the 70s called them dusty and excessive, but boho babes were all in for the drama and movement. Every step in any direction was a mini performance, and even rock stars like Jim Morrison leaned quite hard into the shimmy. In no time, fringe jackets were everywhere. In fact, just fringe was everywhere. We're talking vests, boots, and even bags. Turns out, inspiration from cowboys can be quite glamorous. Best part of fringe jackets were they could be styled so easily. You could throw on a flowy maxi dress paired with a fringe jacket and ankle boots for a bohemian look. You could also pair them with a lovely pair of bell-bottoms and a flowy peasant top. Ponchos. We've had a lot of hippie fashion that really stood the test of time. Most of these can even still be styled today. But taking our third spot is an outfit that came and went. Next up, ponchos, the ultimate I give up fashion. You think headbands and floppy hats were lazy? Ponchos were essentially a square fabric with a hole for your head in the middle. Now, that's really, really lazy. The 70s initially mocked this. "Isn't this supposed to be draped over your couch?" they'd ask. But hippies, just like they always did, were all about functionality. And believe it or not, ponchos were easy to make, warm, and just perfect for layering over bell-bottoms. Remember when Clint Eastwood wore one in High Plains Drifter? I remember how my dad's face lit up when he saw Eastwood in one. There and then, masculinity just got a cozy little update. By the mid-70s, ponchos were a fall staple, and yet again, it was proven that just maybe the simplest ideas are the coziest. What's better is with these guys, you didn't even have to plan how to style them. Just throw them over whatever you were putting on. Platform shoes. You know, we've talked a lot about hippie-inspired outfits and accessories, but what about footwear? They definitely weren't walking around barefooted. Well, thinking back, only one footwear really comes to mind, and I know it's the same one on all your minds. In our number 2 spot, platform shoes. Platform shoes were like the architectural marvels of footwear. Gravity-defying, chunky, and essentially stilts for your feet. At first glance, they actually looked like a hazard just waiting to happen. Everyone in the 70s made the exact complaint: you'll break your ankle. But we just approached the 70s disco era, and disco demanded drama, the kind only platforms could deliver. They were made for towering over the 70s hate, literally. Suddenly, everyone from Elton John to Cher was teetering on 5-inch soles, just to prove that height was indeed power. Sure, you needed a GPS and a miracle to navigate the stairs, but who cared, really, when you looked gorgeous and tall? By the late 70s, even your podiatrist would show up in platforms. Bell-bottoms. And finally, 9 pretty bizarre hippie fashions later, we've reached that one that reigned supreme. The one fashion trend everyone should be grateful hippies made popular. The one fashion that is still in use to this very day. The ultimate go big or go home statement. I know you've been patiently waiting for this one to come up. What began as a counterculture rebellion in the late 60s became the biggest fashion statement of the 70s, with pants so big they could actually double as parachutes. Well, the skeptics had some major concerns, like why would anyone want to drag around 10 pounds of denim with them? Obviously, they were exaggerating, but they did have a point though, a point that hippies didn't care about. They had a thing for dramatic flair, and bell-bottom jeans ensured that. Plus, they looked great on the dance floor. You know this. The bigger the bell, the better the twirl. Like with every other hippie fashion, it didn't take long before even the strictest squares were rocking them. By mid-decade, bell-bottoms were pretty much everywhere from Saturday Night Fever dance floors to high school hallways. You can't even lie you weren't rocking these guys through the 70s and 80s. No hippie fashion ever quite exploded like this. And with that, guys, we've reached the end of yet another exciting journey to the past. If the 70s taught us one thing, it's that fashion isn't about rules in the slightest. It's about rebellion, fun, and sometimes looking like a disco dancing mop. So, next time you see a weird fashion trend, remember, your future self might be rocking it one day. Let us know what you think in the comment section below. Do you think we missed any?